Hey everyone, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of Did That Really Happen?, where we explore strange, interesting, and vague moments in history to find out if they really happened or if they're all just misunderstood urban legends. In today's episode, we'll take a look at a really odd occurrence in U.S. history where fashion choices ended up creating a riot in New York City that lasted 8 days. Did people really lose their minds over the wearing of straw hats in the 1920s? Let's find out. For most of our history, hats have denoted status and affluence within society. More recently, hats were widely worn by gentlemen as a way to follow certain fashion rules unofficially established by the surrounding culture. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, one of the most popular hats worn by men was the straw hat. You've probably seen them in old movies and pictures. We're talking about the straw hats worn by people like wealthy socialite John Jacob Astor IV, a prominent member of the famous Astor family who tragically died during the sinking of the Titanic. And Leonardo DiCaprio sported one while playing Jay Gatsby in the 2013 film based on F. Scott Fitzgerald's classic novel from 1925, The Great Gatsby. But most people recognize him as the iconic hats worn by classic barbershop quartets. Men were expected to wear the hats, often called boaters for their association with seaside outings along the coast during the summer when the weather was warm. If you look at old photographs from the early 1900s, you'll see vast groups of men walking the streets of big cities and wearing straw hats. But that all started to change in 1922. You see, society was much more obsessed with informal fashion rules back then. In fact, America had a day when men were expected to trade their straw hats for warmer ones as winter arrived. September 15th was deemed the day when a gentleman would hang up his straw hat and start wearing a felt or silk one. If one failed to observe this convention, one risked ridicule and mockery in public. Of course, this was considered all in good fun among friends and acquaintances. For the most part, people didn't actively go after anyone who kept wearing straw hats after September 15th. But as the Roaring Twenties inched forward, people became more obsessed with the rule governing the wearing of hats. In fact, major newspapers printed articles warning men to prepare for September 15th or face the wrath of the masses. One article in particular ended up being rather prophetic about the ramifications of the fashion obsession. In 1910, the Pittsburgh Press published an article detailing incidents of violence against men still wearing straw hats after September 15th. The paper warned that while good-natured ribbing between friends over the hat issue was perfectly fine, the general public was getting a bit too forward when enforcing the unofficial deadline to switch over to winter hats. The Pittsburgh Press's warnings would turn out to be accurate just a decade later. In 1922, 2 days before the day that men were expected to change out their hats, a group of kids in New York decided to get a head start on the custom by grabbing straw hats from factory workers and trampling on them. When the gang attempted the same trick on a group of dock workers, the guys retaliated, resulting in a brutal fight. The altercation escalated to the point that traffic on the Manhattan Bridge was blocked. The fight was ultimately broken up and a few people were even arrested. But the violence didn't end there. That night, bands of teens prowled the streets with huge sticks, some of which had a nail driven into the top, looking for men wearing straw hats and assaulting any who resisted. Some reports said that up to 1,000 attackers were involved in the chaos. Several of the victims were hospitalized with severe injuries. Even some off-duty police officers, still wearing straw hats, were attacked by the gang. It got so bad that police officers were arresting their brothers in uniform, not knowing that they were victims of the straw hat snatchers themselves. The situation quickly grew out of control, with many of the streets in New York clogged with rioters and victims. Overall, dozens of attackers were arrested once the dust settled after 8 days of attacks. But many of the rioters simply received fines for their actions due to them being underage. Over the next few years, the obsession with changing hats with the seasons faded. But instances of violence over the trend still cropped up, with one man even being murdered in 1924 for wearing a straw hat out of season. Thankfully, we've mostly learned from our mistakes and moved on from committing violence over a person's fashion choices. The Straw Hat Riot of 1922, as crazy as it seems, it really happened.
Thanks so much for listening to Did That Really Happen? And stay tuned for our next episode. I'm your host, J. William Denton.